donut goo. One time I went on a super official mission trip to Africa, and I decided that I was not going to embarrass Jesus this time around. So I focused on being culturally and socially aware. We went to this remote place, like almost in Cameroon. It was out in the middle of a jungle, middle of nowhere, and we rolled in right about sunset, and they brought us to this house and made us this nice meal, and everybody from this little village gathered around and just stared in the windows at us while we were eating. They had flashlights out as it got darker because they wanted to provide us with light, and there's no electricity. And that attracted the enormous 26-inch wingspan moths that lived in the African jungle. I exaggerate slightly, but they were big. And this one came in, it was flapping around, and moths are made entirely of dust and a little bit of gray blood. It was dripping all of that stuff on our food. And rather than just calmly shooing it away, in an effort to make us feel better about our meal, a couple people came over and started aggressively hacking at it with this little straw broom thing. And everybody's kind of having a good laugh about it, and I'm having a good laugh about it. I'm not going to freak out. I'm going to be a good missionary. So I take my next bite of food, and when I get to about here, the open part, the guy actually contacted the moth, causing the moth to rocket into my open mouth hole. I was already in the act of masticating. Look it up. It's not what you think it is. And I chomped the thing, and I bit into moth dust and goo. And there's this puff of moth death dust that exploded out of my mouth and was sparkling in the flashlight, and everybody's like, well, I'm gonna laugh about it, but also I'm also not gonna just barf up a moth and offend everybody in Africa for not eating their moth. So I just ate it. I didn't know what else to do. So half of it's twitching and the rest I just ingested. And that is the biggest sacrifice I've ever made for Jesus ever in my entire life. You know what Timothy did because he wanted to be a missionary and follow Jesus? He got adult circumcised, and that's what we're talking about today. I know it seems like we talk about circumcision every single episode right now, but I this time I mean it. I think this is it for a while. The context really matters on this one because in Acts chapter 15 that we just did like 5 episodes on, the circumcision deal is a big divisive thing in the church because you got these Jewish Christians who are really into circumcision and they're mad that these new non-Jewish Christians aren't getting adult circumcised. And so they have a big argument about it and some stuff happens. And it seems like the whole thing is stitched up and resolved. You see what I didn't mean to, but I like how that worked out. But then we get into the beginning of chapter 16, and after feeling like we're crystal clear on circumcision is not necessary, we can just kind of put that to rest. Now we're going to have another adult circumcision. It goes like this, verses 1 through 5. So Paul went through Syria and Cilicia, strengthening the churches. And it says he came to Derbe and then to Lystra, where a disciple named Timothy lived, whose mother was a Jewess and a believer, but whose father was a Greek. And the brothers at Lystra and Iconium spoke well of him. And Paul wanted to take him along on the journey, so he circumcised him because of the Jews who lived in that area, for they all knew that his father was a Greek. As they traveled from town to town, they delivered the decisions reached by the apostles and elders in Jerusalem for the people to obey. So the churches were strengthened in the faith and grew daily in numbers. In light of what we just looked at in Acts chapter 15, this little beginning part of Acts chapter 16 raises a serious academic question for me, which is, what the heck? I thought we were crystal clear on the circumcision thing. It's not necessary for salvation. Then you recruit this poor kid and the first thing you do is circumcise him. Like, what's going on? What is Paul doing here? Did he buckle to social pressure? Was he just faking it at Jerusalem? Or is there some other factor in play here that we got to look closer to understand? This passage starts with Paul going back to a couple places he's already been on a previous missionary journey, and that's recorded in Acts 14. This is Derbe and Lystra. And the Lystra thing went pretty well at first last time around. There was a miraculous healing, but then people got excited and thought Paul was Zeus, so they tried to sacrifice to him, and Paul didn't like it. You remember in this stuff? And Paul's like, no, don't do that. And they were like, okay, cool, fine, then we'll murder you with rocks instead. And they left him for dead at the edge of the city, and then he came to, and he went to Derbe, and he regrouped, and he came back to Lystra to work with what was happening in this fledgling church there. So Timothy, who we meet in this verse, is a product of whatever good things happened between the lines in Acts chapter 14 last time Paul was here. The believers there are speaking really highly of this Timothy guy, and Paul's interested in taking him along on this trip, which is kind of weird because we just got done with a passage where Paul had a rookie he didn't want to take along on a trip, and he so badly didn't want to take that rookie along that he parted ways with his old friend Barnabas. But here he's got somebody who he sees something in that he likes, and he has to figure out, how are we going to make this work so that this kid can be effective while we get out in the mission field. So he has him adult circumcised. Yeah, that seems weird in light of what we just did in Acts chapter 15. But the text actually gives something of a hint of the rationale. It says that Paul did this because of the Jews who lived in that area, for they all knew that Timothy's father was a Greek. Why would that matter? Well, Jewishness was generally passed along on the mom's side. And so it might have felt really weird to Jewish people living in a predominantly Greek area to see a kid who didn't get circumcised. And it might cause them to wonder, hey, where are your loyalties, pal? Are you more Greek or are you more Jewish? What's the deal? Now, to us, it might feel like, oh, who cares? I mean, close enough. You all lived a long time ago in the same little part of the world. What's the difference? About 200 years before this, the Jews were ruled by Greeks who really pushed their culture on the Jewish people. Some Jewish people embraced that and became Greekified Jews or Hellenized Jews. Other Jewish people said, no way, we're sticking to the guns of our faith and our history. And they had a big giant rebellion. This was the Maccabees rebellion, and they overthrew their Greek overlords. And then eventually the Romans came along and just leveled everything and dominated all culture. But there's still this leftover tension between this Greek movement in history and staunch Judaism. And it would be like if you saw someone wearing a shirt with a big giant red swastika on it, even though there's no Hitler anymore, and even though all the concentration camps are closed and dealt with, it'd still feel like, I don't trust your loyalties because of the swastika you're wearing around. And the Jewish disdain for that Greek mindset would not be that much less than the current Jewish disdain for, Nazism. This was a huge deal, and the Greek mindset represented a previous vile oppressor that they worked really hard to get out from under. I'm going to come right back to this controversy, but quickly, the passage rounds out with Paul and Timothy hitting the road and taking this letter with them that was written at the Jerusalem Council, explaining what they're doing with this whole controversy, and giving it to a whole bunch of these fledgling churches and saying, hey, look, we resolved this thing. You just need to read this letter and see that as Christians were unified and it's cool. And apparently the church did well and thrived, and they grew daily in numbers. Back to the controversy. Here's a couple different things that people have made of what happened here with this circumcision over the years. Option number one, Paul buckled under pressure and should not have done this to Timothy. Some people would say that Paul was gun shy and tired of taking hits after what happened on the first missionary journey. And he just wanted this one to go smoother, and so he had Timothy circumcised, and Timothy had to pay the price for Paul's weakness. Could be. Another option is that Paul wanted to assure these parents that he was going to take care of this kid that he was taking off their hands and taking out into this big adventure. And everybody knew that Paul got beat up pretty bad on the last trip. What guarantee do I have that that's not going to happen to my kid, Timothy? That's what I'd want to know as a parent. And Paul says, I know a way to increase the odds that it will go well for him, but y'all aren't going to like it because it involves a and by that I mean. In both of these first two options that I threw out, Paul kind of screwed up, if that's what happened. He buckled under pressure, wasn't really consistent with what he just worked out and got right in Acts chapter 15. And that's possible. That could be a good read on this. He's not God, he's fallible, so you could screw things up. But there's a third read that to me makes more sense based on how everything unfolds and where it seems to be going. And that is that this was a strategic decision on the part of Paul, Silas, and Timothy to say, what's going to set us up for maximum success on this super important endeavor? And it's possible that they all came to the same conclusion and said, look, as weird as it is, we need to accommodate these people we're trying to reach in their weakness, even if it means something that dramatic. In that scenario, if Timothy was in on that plan and agreed that that was the right thing to do, it means that he was in a place where he was saying the spiritual well-being of these people who right now don't like me and the advancement of the kingdom of God and all of this stuff that I believe in is more important than me avoiding the pain and discomfort and awkwardness that would come with enduring this procedure. I have eaten half of a moth in the interest of trying to do good and redemptive things overseas. And given the option between that or repeated adult circumcisions, you can sign me up for a whole bucket of mods, because I ain't doing the other thing. But Timothy did. There's no evidence to suggest that in any of those three options I threw out that this was against his will. What we see here is some insight into where his priorities were at. The take home of this video is not, so let's all go circumcise each other to prove how much we love Jesus. That would be irrelevant and make no sense and not in any way be helpful for advancing the church, the gospel, or Christian stuff in this day and age. Just, I would say don't. But There might be other things where we feel completely justified in saying, I'm not doing that for other people because those people are wrong and those people don't like me. Where it might make more sense for those of us who believe in all this stuff to say, oh crap, you know what, I might actually need to lay down some of my rights and endure some things I don't really want to endure, even if they do seem kind of culturally weird, in the interest of showing love and communicating the grace of Christ to people who aren't right now in a position to really hear it or get it. I don't know what that looks like. I don't know what those things might be, but I am certainly challenged by the example of Timothy and his willingness to go to a place that I can't imagine me ever being willing to go myself. Hey, a big thank you to the literally dozens of you who are still with me after 6 straight episodes on circumcision. And as a special way of saying thank you for your commitment and endurance, I've got a super fun version of the 50-50 today. I've got these 2 subscribe buttons here. They look the same, but one subscribes you to this channel. The other today is going to take you to an animated video that's going to help you perform your own circumcision in the comfort of your own home. I'm Matt, and if you thought this whole worst Christian ever thing was an act, just click both of those buttons and watch the video, and you'll see I meant it. See you soon.